I finally got the chat to take it to publish it to friends, but it still won't go public. But at least it's not locked anymore. Oh my gosh. So, okay. Let's get back to it. I'm probably going to have to edit this like crazy. We're talking about brain death and consciousness. So, the main thing I wanted to get across in tonight's show is that the brain is a physical structure and it merely supports the electromagnetic and light fields that make up the spirit and the soul. The physical structure of the brain supports the soul and the spirit. And when there is no brain function, and when that tissue consequently dies, it can no longer support the electromagnetic and light fields that make up the consciousness. So, a person's spirit is not the same as a person's soul. And I hope that people can come back on and rejoin. The spirit is made up of physical constituents that are measurable in our environment, such as an electromagnetic field, kinetic energy, light energy. Your DNA holds photons of light. And so those are all measurable physical things that the brain supports. The soul is different. The soul is the person's connection to the divine. It's an energetic connection to the divine source. It gives us our human nature of empathy and compassion. And so what we're talking about in consciousness is like a combination of spirit and the soul. And what happens to that energy when the brain can no longer support those energies? And I'm still not seeing anybody on the chat. I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to try to figure out what the problem is, which means I've got to email the streaming service and ask them why this can't go public. Now, it's public on my professional page, but not on my private page. It's just for friends, just sharing to friends, but that's okay. If you have ever read about astral projection or out-of-body experiences, the spirit and soul can travel past the physical body, still be connected to it through a light cord. It's like a ray of light, and since you're made up of light, that totally makes sense. But it's anchored. The light is anchored to the physical body because the physical body functions if you're just doing an astral projection or an out-of-body experience. Now, if you have a person who is brain dead, the body still anchors that soul and spirit next to it. But the brain can't function to allow the consciousness to come through. So therein lies the problem. Let's take a look at what kind of things they look at to determine whether or not somebody is brain dead. And brain death is a medical condition in which all functions of the brain, including the brainstem, have permanently ceased. And that can be, through a trauma, through a virus, through lack of blood flow. And it's considered the legal and medical definition of death in many states and area jurisdictions. It's the definition of whether or not somebody is alive, because you cannot live without life support if your brain is not functioning. Now, the heart will still beat, because if you're supplying oxygen to the heart with a machine, the heart has its own pacemaker cells that keep the heart pumping blood. And even though there's blood pumping to the brain, if the tissue has been damaged, it's not going to do any good. Now, here are some of the tests that they do to determine whether or not a person is brain dead. Now, I know there are more advanced testing now than when I was an ICU nurse, but here's just some of the things that were done when I was working in nursing. Brain MRI, and what that's going to tell you is the tissue quality and maybe even some blood flow. Whether or not you have a gag or a choking reflex in the back of your throat, whether or not you have a corneal reflex, and that's the eye reflex. And often you would use a cotton swab and touch the eye and to see if there's any reflexive action there. You would check the pupils to see if they respond to light. And in the old days, they did what we called an ice water caloric test, where you instill ice water into the ear and it produces a reflex. But if you're brain dead, none of those tests will show any type of reflexes. So, and that was just some of the ways that we had to determine whether or not the brain was functioning. Now, let me tell you about a story of a young patient that I had years ago. It might be 20 years ago, I think, maybe 20. Young person in their 20s, I think, and I believe they became brain dead from a virus. I don't remember the exact details. It's been so long ago. But I remember the doctors talking to the mother and telling the mother that the child was brain dead. And we had been taking care of this person for, I want to say, at least a week or two. And the mother asked me what I thought. Now, I didn't tell anybody back then that I was a medium, but I could actually see her consciousness kind of floating beside the bed, looking down on herself and watching everything that was going on. And the mother was trying to make the decision whether or not to remove the ventilator. And so we talked, and I said, I really feel like she's still in there. She wasn't exactly in there. She was beside the bed where I could see her, but I couldn't say anything. Anyway, the mother decided that she would keep the child on the ventilator and work with her for another week or two. And from what I remember, the patient started responding. It was very mild. And then, of course, she got to the point where they moved her out of the ICU. And I got a note from the mom, I guess it was almost a year later, that they were home and she was walking and talking. Not well, but she was able to walk and talk. So some of that brain regenerated itself. how that happened, I have no idea. But that's my experience with working with people who've been diagnosed with that. Now, so what I think, and these are just my thoughts on the situation, is the body only functions as a scaffolding for this light energy and the electromagnetic fields and the consciousness. Now, you know how they say your life flashes before your eyes when you're dying or at the point of death? Well, that happened to me in a car wreck. I saw my life flashing before my eyes, but it seemed more to me like a download, like an automatic download, like my consciousness knew it was in danger of losing the body and it started the download onto the energy that was my spirit and soul. So what I feel like is that the body is only functioning as a scaffolding for the light and electromagnetic fields, and the consciousness is actually stored in these energy fields. And it's not really too off the realm of possibility, if you want to say, if you think of how much data that you can store on a silicone chip, and you have this big energy field that makes up your consciousness. It's quite easy to say, yes, all of that you've remembered and that you've done in your life and previous lives could easily be stored on that energy. Hey to House of Biggs, gosh, thanks for hanging in there with me. Now, from what I have talked to patients that have coded and come back, that we've gotten back, every one of them told me that they could still hear me, hear the doctors, hear everything that was going on. Now, even though your ears aren't working, hearing is still a pulsating vibration, and so the spirit can sense this without having the ears working. Okay, because it's a vibratory perception along with subconscious intelligence interpretation. What I mean by that is when the spirit is separated from the body, it's in the subconscious quantum field, and so it's connected to everything, and it's able to sense intelligently what's going on throughout that field. Now, when you do EVPs of the deceased, the way that those work is the spirit vibrationally imprints an electromagnetic signal onto the device. Now, used to in the old days when we first started doing EVPs, we just had electromagnetic tape, the tape recorder, the actual tape that was electromagnetic. And so, but now we have, really nice devices that we can use, but it's still electromagnetic. It's still electronic equipment. And we're still, manipulating electromagnetic fields when we do EVPs. So if you have somebody who has ended up brain dead, you need to talk to them still and talk out loud so that they can perceive the vibrations of the voice that you're giving off. And it will help them understand better what you're trying to get across to them. Know that they're still anchored to their body, yet they're not in that brain. They're beside it. That's just from my experience. I can only give you what I have experienced that I know to be true, that I've seen. Now, when the body is completely dead, all the machines are taken away, the rest of the body releases that spirit and soul. It releases that tether that's connected to that person, and then they're free to move on and to cross over. But they're still there, so everything that you say, do, they can see. If you put a cross in their hand and do a prayer for them, they're going to be aware of that, and they're going to know everything. And they may try to communicate with you through dreams, because even though they're tethered to the body, they're still in that subconscious field, so they can come into a dream if you are receptive, only if you are receptive. So they can come into the dream and maybe give you a message, or maybe even let you know what they would like done. Now, remember, though, that the language of the subconscious is visual imagery, so what they have to tell you or impress upon you is going to be in a visual message. It's sometimes people can talk in a dream like that, but most often the language of the subconscious is all visual imagery. So anyway, I hope this helps the person that asked me to do the show on this. I know it's been kind of haphazard, but I get flustered when these things, when the electronic stuff doesn't work like it's supposed to. And so I get a little flustered, and then I can't keep a train of thought. So sorry, it's been all over the place. I will look into it and get it fixed, and hopefully we can get this edited so it doesn't look so awful. All right. Don't forget, if you all want to request a show topic, all right, just email me at kkaufman309@gmail.com, or better yet, message me on Facebook Messenger, and I will put it on the agenda. The next show that we're going to do, there's a couple more shows that I want to get done before Halloween. The next show that I'm going to do is what to look for when you're going to buy a house, so that you don't end up with like a real problem. Let's say you go to look at a house and you think it's great, and then you pay for it and you move in and you find out there's some kind of spirit there that you just can't live with, that wants you out, and it's a big mess. And two, some places can energetically just make you sick and drain you too. They're just not good for you. So I've developed a checklist of things that you need to do, and things you need to look at and watch for before you decide to buy a property. Then the next show after that is going to be situations that can't be fixed. And those are hauntings that no amount of clearings can fix. The situations behind those. Because in the old days, when they first started the shows on TV about hauntings, and the priests would come in and they would clear the property, and then everything was perfect. No more hauntings. If you really watch the show nowadays, some of the shows, they'll actually tell the truth and say, well, it came back. Yeah, it was okay for a month, and then it came back. And then it came back again. And we tried 2-3 times, and we're gonna go over why things don't work, and what if anything you can do. And then I was talking to a friend of mine who's a nurse, and my husband, and we were talking about old hospital stories, things that happened to us over the years, and stories from the burn unit and all that kind of stuff. And she was like, I'd love to come on and talk about my story. So I was like, okay, let's do a show on that. So that'll be Tales from the Hospital. You guys have a great evening, and I will see you next time. Kisses from Kentucky. Bye, y'all. Let's see if I can get this to go right.